The massive doorway of the Magnitude Embassy made James Reed feel like a child entering a giant's castle. At 5 feet 8 inches, he was of average height for a human, but here among the Magnites, he might as well have been a garden gnome. His hands grew sweaty around the diplomatic tablet. He clutched to his chest like a shield. "Just remember your training," he whispered to himself, trying to ignore how his voice shook. The United Earth government had chosen him for this mission because of his perfect record in diplomatic relations, but none of his previous assignments had involved a species that could accidentally step on him. The entry hall stretched up at least 30 feet, with golden light filtering through crystal windows, designed for beings twice his size. Each footstep echoed off walls decorated with murals showing Magnites in various poses of victory and celebration. James noticed that in several of the images, the giant humanoids appeared to be feasting. His stomach turned. "Welcome, Lieutenant Reed." A deep voice boomed from above, making him jump. A Magnite official dressed in flowing silver robes stood at the top of a sweeping staircase. "I am Chief Minister Tom. We are honored to have Earth's representative join us." James bowed deeply, remembering his protocol training. "The honor is mine, Chief Minister. Earth looks forward to strengthening our bonds with Magnitude." The Chief Minister descended the stairs, each step making tiny tremors that James tried to pretend he couldn't feel. "There is someone special I would like you to meet. Ambassador Kate has just returned from her studies of human culture. She will be your primary contact during your stay." Before James could respond, another figure emerged from a side door. His mouth went dry. Ambassador Kate stood at least 12 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful limbs that made him think of ancient stories about gods walking among mortals. Her silver-blue skin caught the light like polished metal, and her four-fingered hands could have easily wrapped around his entire torso. "Lieutenant Reed," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle for someone her size. "I have so looked forward to meeting you." She knelt down to be closer to his level, but this only emphasized their size difference more. "I hope we can become very close during your stay." James felt his heart trying to escape through his throat. The way she said "close" made him think of a chef examining a particularly interesting ingredient. He'd heard rumors about Magnites and their appetites, about how some of them viewed smaller species as delicacies. They were just rumors, right? "The pleasure is mine, Ambassador," he managed to say, proud that his voice barely cracked at all. "I look forward to our diplomatic relations." Kate's face lit up with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Wonderful. Then you'll join me for dinner tonight." There it was, the invitation he'd been dreading. James felt sweat trickle down his back. "Dinner?" he squeaked. "Yes. I've been studying human customs. I've even had my dining room modified to accommodate your size." Her eyes sparkled with what he desperately hoped was not hunger. "I find human culture absolutely consuming." Chief Minister Tom clapped his huge hands together, creating a sound like thunder. "Excellent. It's settled then. Ambassador Kate will be your personal attaché during your stay. Lieutenant Reed, you two will work very closely together." James wanted to object, to request a different arrangement, any other arrangement, but years of diplomatic training kicked in. That's very kind," he said weakly. "I look forward to working together." Kate stood back up to her full height, beaming down at him. "I'll send transport for you at sunset, little one. Don't worry about bringing anything. I'll provide everything we need." As James watched her stride away, each step covering more distance than 3 of his, he wondered if he could fake a diplomatic emergency, or maybe a sudden illness, or possibly just hide in his quarters for the next 6 months. The Chief Minister's voice interrupted his panicked thoughts. "You're very lucky, Lieutenant. Ambassador Kate specifically requested to work with you after studying your profile. She seems quite interested in you." James clutched his tablet tighter. Lucky wasn't exactly the word he would have chosen. Doom felt more appropriate. As he was led to his quarters, He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just accepted an invitation to be the main course rather than a dinner guest. At least the room they gave him had a sturdy lock. Not that it would help much against someone who could probably tear the door off its hinges. He spent the next few hours alternating between pacing, checking his will, and wondering if anyone would notice if he stowed away on the next transport back to Earth. The transport to Ambassador Kate's residence was designed for Magnite size, making James feel like a child in an adult's car. He sat in a seat that could have fit three of him, watching the alien city's massive buildings pass by through windows that started at his chest level. The entire ride, he kept thinking about ways to escape this dinner without causing a diplomatic incident. His universal translator beeped softly in his ear, reminding him it was active. At least he wouldn't have trouble understanding his host, even if he wished he could misunderstand the dinner invitation entirely. The transport stopped in front of a building that looked like a modern castle, its entrance large enough to drive a truck through. "Ambassador Kate is waiting in the dining room," said the Magnite driver, who had to bend almost double to look at James. "Down the main hall. You can't miss it." James walked through corridors that made him feel like he was in a giant's museum. The walls displayed what looked like cooking implements, and he tried very hard not to think about their size. His footsteps echoed in the vast space until he heard music coming from ahead, something that sounded like a mix between classical earth music and deep rhythmic drums. The dining room doors were open, and James froze at the threshold. Ambassador Kate stood by a table that could have served as a dance floor for a human party. She wore something that reminded him of an Earth evening gown, but in shimmering materials he'd never seen before. The lights caught her silver-blue skin in a way that made her look both beautiful and terrifying. "Lieutenant Reed." She smiled down at him. "I'm so glad you came. I was worried you might find an excuse not to join me. Some of your fellow humans seem nervous around us." "Me? Nervous?" James's voice came out higher than he intended. "No, not at all. I'm just very focused on proper diplomatic relations." Kate's smile widened. "Wonderful. I've been absolutely dying to taste what humans have to offer." James felt his knees go weak. The translator beeped again in his ear, and he wondered if it was malfunctioning. Surely she hadn't meant that the way it sounded. "Please sit." She gestured to what looked like a high chair, but sized for an adult human. "I had this specially made for you. I want you to be comfortable while we consume this meal together." James climbed into the chair, trying not to think about how he was now at perfect height to be grabbed easily. The table in front of him had human-sized plates and utensils, which somehow made everything more unsettling. She clearly put thought into this. "I've been studying human culture intensively," Kate said as she sat down across from him. "Everything about your species is so fascinating. So small, yet so full of flavor." The translator beeped again. James made a mental note to have it checked, assuming he survived this dinner. "I find myself hungry for more knowledge about Earth," she continued, leaning forward with intense interest. "I could just eat up everything you tell me about your world." A Magnite servant entered, carrying covered dishes. James watched in horror as they placed an enormous platter in front of Kate and a smaller one in front of him. His hand shook as he reached for his napkin. "I hope you don't mind," Kate said, "but I took the liberty of ordering something special. I wanted this dinner to be memorable." The servant removed the covers, and James blinked in surprise. On his plate was what appeared to be a perfectly normal Earth-style pasta dish. On Kate's plate was a massive salad. "I've become quite fascinated by Earth vegetables," Kate explained, spearing what looked like a head-sized lettuce leaf with her fork. "Your planet's plant life is so diverse, though I had to get special permission to import these. Some of my colleagues think it's strange that I prefer vegetation to our traditional mineral supplements." James stared at her, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. You're vegetarian." "Oh yes, all Magnites are. Our digestive systems can't process meat at all. Did you think?" She paused, then burst out laughing. a sound like distant thunder. "Lieutenant Reed, did you think I was going to eat you?" The translator didn't beep this time. James felt his face grow hot as he realized just how wrong he'd been. But before he could respond, Kate's next words made him choke on his water. "Though I must admit," she said with a twinkle in her eye, "I wouldn't mind consuming you in other ways." The translator beeped 3 times in rapid succession. James spent the next week trying to make sense of his dinner with Ambassador Kate. The revelation that Magnites were vegetarians had calmed some of his fears, but her final comment about consuming him in other ways kept him up at night. His universal translator had been checked and was working perfectly, which only added to his confusion. Now he found himself being led through the streets of the Magnite capital during their biggest cultural festival of the year. Kate walked beside him, taking tiny steps to match his pace. The streets were filled with giant decorations in bright colors, and the air smelled like sweet flowers and spices. The Festival of Unity celebrates the joining of different paths, Kate explained, ducking under a banner that was at chest height for her but flew far above James's head. "It's traditional for friends to attend together." James noticed other Magnites giving them curious looks. Some smiled and whispered to each other, while others made a strange gesture that looked like drawing a heart in the air. His translator remained suspiciously silent about these cultural signals. "Here," Kate said, stopping at a booth that had both Magnite and human-sized items. "We should get matching festival bands." She picked up what looked like a delicate silver bracelet sized for her wrist and a similar, smaller one that would fit James. "These bands show that we're together for the festival," she explained, her silver blue skin taking on a darker shade that James was starting to recognize as a blush. "It's tradition." Before he could object, she had already paid for them. James found himself wearing a bracelet that matched the one on Kate's wrist, though hers could have probably served as his belt. They stopped at various food stalls, where Kate insisted he tried different Magnite vegetables and fruits. Some were larger than his entire body, but the vendors always had human-sized portions ready. James began to notice that every stall seemed prepared for his arrival, as if they'd been expecting a human customer. "Would you like to try the Unity dance?" Kate asked as they reached a large open square where Magnites were performing what looked like a complex waltz. "I've been practicing the human-adapted version." "I don't think," James started to say, but Kate had already taken his hand, or rather, wrapped 2 of her fingers gently around his entire hand. "Trust me," she said softly, and somehow he did. The dance turned out to be less terrifying than he'd imagined. Kate moved with surprising grace for someone her size, and she clearly practiced how to handle a partner who barely came up to her waist. James found himself being lifted and spun in ways that should have been scary but somehow weren't. The other dancers made space for them, and he heard what sounded like appreciative murmurs from the crowd. "You're a natural," Kate said as the dance ended, her eyes sparkling. "Most small species are too afraid to try this with us." "I was afraid," James admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "I'm still afraid sometimes. Everything here is so big, and I feel so perfect," Kate finished for him. "You feel perfect." Her translator beeped softly at that word, suggesting there might have been another meaning that didn't quite translate. The festival continued into the evening, and James found himself relaxing more than he had since arriving on Magnitude. He watched championship teams compete in what appeared to be their version of basketball, played with a ball the size of a small car. Kate explained the rules, sitting cross-legged on the ground, so they could talk more easily. As the twin suns began to set, the sky filled with floating lights the size of houses. The crowd began to pair off, and James noticed that many couples were sitting very close together, making that same heart-drawing gesture he'd seen earlier. "James," Kate said, using his first name for the first time. "There's something I should explain about this festival, about why I really invited you." But before she could continue, emergency sirens began to blare across the city. Kate jumped to her feet, instantly alert. Her communicator buzzed with what sounded like urgent messages. "Something's wrong," she said, all trace of softness gone from her voice. "We need to get back to the embassy. Now." James found himself being lifted carefully, but quickly into her arms as Kate began to run, her long strides covering ground faster than any human vehicle could. As the sounds of panic filled the streets around them, he realized that for the first time, being held by her made him feel safe rather than scared. The embassy was in chaos when Kate carried James through the massive front doors. Magnite officials rushed back and forth, their huge forms making the building shake. Emergency lights flashed overhead, and James could hear alarm systems beeping from multiple directions. "Put me down," James said, his diplomatic training kicking in. "I need to contact Earth." Kate carefully set him on his feet next to his human-sized communication station. "The Crushers have entered our solar system," she explained, her voice tight with worry. "3 warships. They're demanding we hand over all smaller species in our space, including humans." James felt his blood run cold. Everyone knew about the Crushers, a species that believed bigger meant better, and smaller species were meant to serve. They were even larger than the Magnites, averaging 20 feet tall, and they had already conquered several worlds. "Earth needs to know," James said, typing quickly at his console. "But why now? Why here?" "Because of us," Kate said quietly. "They've been watching. They saw humans and Magnites working together, proving that size differences don't matter. It threatens everything they believe in." The main screen lit up with an image that made both of them step back. A Crusher commander filled the display, his gray, rocky skin and 4 glowing eyes making him look like a mountain come to life. "Magnitude," the Crusher growled, "you have 1 hour to surrender all humans in your territory. Refuse, and we will take them by force. Your primitive emotions for these tiny beings amuse us. Remember your place in the natural order." The screen went dark. James looked up at Kate, seeing rage in her normally gentle eyes. "We need to evacuate the humans," she said. "Get them to the bunkers until—" "No," James interrupted. "That's exactly what they expect. But they don't understand what makes Earth special." He paused, an idea forming. "And they don't understand what makes Magnitude special either." Kate knelt down to his level, a move that no longer made him nervous. "What are you thinking?" "They think size is everything. But I've learned something here. It's not about how big you are. It's about how you use what you have." James pointed to the building schematics on his screen. "The Crushers are too big to fit in most of our spaces, but I can fit anywhere. And you're just the right size to help." Understanding dawned in Kate's eyes. "The defense systems, they're designed for Magnite operators, but the maintenance tunnels were built for smaller repair crews," James finished. "I can get in there, rewire the systems. We just need to keep them busy." Kate's face broke into a fierce grin. "I can do better than that. I can make them so angry they forget to think straight." She touched her bracelet from the festival, which James still wore the matching pair to. "But you'll have to trust me completely." "I already do," James said, surprising himself with how true it was. The next 45 minutes were a blur of action. While Kate led a team of Magnite diplomats in the most infuriating negotiation session James had ever heard, he crawled through maintenance tunnels with a tablet computer. His small size let him reach critical systems that would have taken Magnite engineers hours to access through the main panels. He could hear Kate's voice through the walls as she thoroughly insulted the Crusher's intelligence, society, and mothers. "For being so large," she taunted, "your minds are remarkably small. No wonder you fear those smaller than you. They might make you think." James grinned as he rewired another defense node. The Crushers were so focused on Kate's masterful diplomatic insults that they didn't notice their ships were being surrounded by reprogrammed defense satellites. When the Crushers finally lost patience and ordered their ships to attack, they found their weapon systems locked by familiar codes, Earth codes, transmitted through Magnite technology, using frequencies their large communication systems weren't designed to detect. Size isn't everything. Kate's voice rang out as the Crusher ships hung helpless in space. But since you respect only strength, know this: any attack on humans is an attack on magnitude, and we protect our own. James emerged from the maintenance tunnel covered in dust and grinning. He looked up at Kate, who reached down to help him up with a gentleness that still amazed him. "Our own?" he asked quietly. Kate's skin darkened in that now familiar blush. "Too forward." "No," James said, holding onto her fingers. "Just right." The day after the Crusher incident, James found himself in a meeting with the other human diplomats. They had gathered to discuss the attack, but somehow the conversation had turned to his relationship with Ambassador Kate. The knowing looks on their faces made him uncomfortable. "So," said Bill, the senior human diplomat, "you still haven't figured it out, have you?" He was trying not to smile, which made James even more nervous. "Figured what out?" James asked, though part of him already knew this was going to be embarrassing. "About Kate. About why she requested you specifically as her diplomatic partner. About what consumption means to magnates." Bill pulled out his tablet and brought up a cultural dictionary. "Maybe you should have read this section more carefully." James took the tablet and began to read. His eyes went wide, and his face turned redder with each paragraph. The other diplomats watched with obvious amusement as understanding finally dawned on him. "You mean, all this time, when she said she wanted to consume me?" James couldn't even finish the sentence. "It's their way of expressing romantic interest," Bill explained, finally letting out the laugh he'd been holding back. "When a magnate says they want to consume someone, they mean they're falling in love. They believe that love consumes you completely, becomes part of you. Like, when humans say someone is consumed by love." James thought back to all his interactions with Kate, the dinner invitation, her comments about finding humans fascinating, the festival bracelet. Every time she used the word consume, his translator had beeped, trying to indicate there was a cultural context he was missing. "The bracelets from the festival," another diplomat chimed in. "They're basically their version of promise rings. And that gesture everyone was making. Their symbol for romantic commitment. Why didn't any of you tell me?" James demanded, though he already knew he looked too ridiculous to be properly angry. "Are you kidding? This is the most entertainment we've had in months," Bill said. "Besides, Kate asked us not to. In magnite culture, the one who is interested has to make their intentions clear through actions and patience. She's been courting you according to their traditions." James buried his face in his hands as more memories surfaced. Every time he'd run away or acted scared, she must have thought he was playing hard to get. No wonder the other magnates had been so interested in their interactions. "She requested me specifically?" he asked, looking up. "Oh yes," Bill nodded. "She saw your profile and, according to her, was consumed by interest. She spent months studying human culture, had furniture made to accommodate you, learned about Earth foods. She even took classes on how to handle humans safely because she was worried about frightening you with her size." Before James could respond, his communicator buzzed. It was a message from Kate. "After yesterday's excitement, I think we need to talk. Meet me in the garden." The other diplomats immediately started making exaggerated heart gestures, the human version, not the magnite one. "Go on," Bill said, shooing him toward the door. "And try not to run away this time. It's not every day a 12-foot-tall ambassador falls in love with you." James walked to the embassy gardens in a daze, his mind replaying every interaction with Kate in this new light. He found her sitting on a bench designed to accommodate both magnite and human visitors. She looked nervous, which was an odd expression to see on someone who could accidentally step on a car. "James," she said softly as he approached, "after yesterday, I think I need to be more direct. My translator keeps telling me there might be cultural confusion about certain terms." "You mean about consumption?" James said, finally feeling brave enough to address it. Kate's skin darkened in her characteristic blush. "I just found out. All this time, I thought. He started laughing. I thought you were going to eat me. Eat you. Kate looked horrified for a moment, then started laughing too. Her laughter shook the nearby trees. Is that why you kept running away? Oh, my poor little human. I've been trying to tell you I'm falling in love with you. James climbed up onto the bench beside her. I think I got that message eventually. Just took me a while to translate it properly. Kate smiled down at him, her eyes soft. And now that you understand the proper meaning of consumption. Well, James said, reaching for her hand. I might be feeling a bit consumed myself. The peace after James and Kate's conversation in the garden lasted exactly 6 hours. Then the Crushers returned, this time with a fleet of 10 ships. The embassy's warning sirens pierced the night, dragging James from his first peaceful sleep since arriving on Magnitude. They're targeting the human quarters. Kate's voice boomed through his room's communication system. James, don't move. I'm coming to get you. But James was already moving. He grabbed his diplomatic tablet and ran, not away from danger, but toward the embassy's main control room. He heard the building shake with impacts as the Crushers began their attack. The main doors burst open, and Kate rushed in. She was wearing what looked like battle armor, making her even more imposing than usual. What are you doing? We need to get you to safety. No, James said firmly. I'm not hiding this time. The Crushers think size is everything. Let's prove them wrong again. Kate stared at him for a moment, then broke into a fierce grin. Together. Together. They rushed to the control room, where Magnite officials were coordinating their defense. The screen showed the Crusher ships surrounding the city, their weapons charging. A message flashed across the main display. Surrender the humans and the traitors who protect them. They're not just after humans this time, one official reported. They want to punish any Magnites who've shown weakness by caring for smaller species. James watched as Kate's expression hardened. He knew that look now, not anger, but determination. She wasn't just fighting for duty anymore. She was fighting for love. I have an idea, James said, pulling up schematics on his tablet. But it's risky, and we'll both have to trust each other completely. Kate knelt beside him, her armor clinking. I trusted you enough to give you my heart. I trust you with everything else too. James felt warmth spread through his chest. A week ago, having a 12-foot-tall warrior woman profess her love would have sent him running. Now it made him feel invincible. The Crushers think bigger is better, he said. Then let's give them what they want. The plan came together quickly. While the Magnite defense forces kept the Crushers distracted, James and Kate made their way to the city's main power station. The building was designed for Magnite engineers, but its most crucial systems were only accessible through small maintenance tunnels, just like at the embassy. The power core is through there, Kate said, pointing to a tiny tunnel. But James, the radiation won't affect humans the same way it affects larger species, he finished. That's why they made the tunnels human-sized. Sometimes being small is an advantage. Kate touched his face gently with one finger. Be careful, my little consumed one. James smiled at the Magnite term of endearment. Keep them busy. And when I give the signal, I'll be ready. James crawled through the tunnel system, following the path they planned. Around him, he could hear the sounds of battle as Kate and the other Magnites engaged the Crusher ground forces that had begun landing. His hands moved quickly over control panels and power conduits, rewiring the city's defense grid. Through his earpiece, he heard the Crusher commander's voice. Your pet humans cannot save you this time. Magnites, accept your place in the natural order. Oh, we know our place, Kate's voice replied. Right beside them. James reached the final junction. Ready, he called through his communicator, hitting the switch in 3, 2, 1. The city's power grid surged. Energy coursed through the modified defense systems, creating what appeared to be a massive hologram over the city. To the Crusher's stunned eyes, it looked like the Magnites had grown to 30 feet tall, bigger than any Crusher. While the enemy stood shocked by the display, the real attack came from below. Small drones, controlled by James through the power station systems, disabled the Crusher's weapons and shields. Size isn't everything, Kate's voice boomed across the battlefield. But since you insist on learning the hard way. The Magnite forces struck, their coordinated attack driving back the confused Crushers. From his position in the power station, James watched through security feeds as Kate led the charge, beautiful and terrifying in her armor. And for the first time, watching her fight, he felt no fear at all, only pride, love, and the certainty that he finally found where he belonged. 3 months after the Crusher defeat, James stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his diplomatic uniform. Today marked the signing of the first official alliance between Earth and Magnitude, and as the human who had helped make it possible, he had a special role to play. He also had a special announcement to make, one that would change everything. The ceremony hall was filled with both humans and Magnites. The furniture was arranged in sections to accommodate both sizes, but there was no more separation between the species. Humans sat comfortably next to their giant friends, all barriers of fear long gone. Chief Minister Tom stood at the giant podium, his voice booming across the hall. Today we celebrate not just an alliance between worlds, but the proof that difference in size means nothing compared to the size of one's heart. James caught Kate's eye from where she stood with the other ambassadors. She wore her formal diplomatic robes, but she had also kept the festival bracelet that matched his. Her silver-blue skin glowed with happiness. And now, the Chief Minister continued, Lieutenant James Reed would like to make an announcement. James walked to the special platform they had built, which raised him to a height where both humans and Magnites could see him easily. He took a deep breath, remembering how terrified he had been just months ago of even being in the same room as a Magnite. When I first came to Magnitude, he began, I was afraid. Everything was too big, too different. I thought being small made me vulnerable. He smiled at Kate. I was wrong. Being different sizes isn't a weakness, it's a strength. The Crushers couldn't understand that, which is why they failed. He touched the bracelet on his wrist. I learned that love doesn't care about size, and that sometimes the scariest things in life turn out to be the best things. He switched to speaking Magnite, a language he had been secretly learning, which is why I'm honored to announce that Ambassador Kate and I are officially entering a consumption bond. The hall erupted in cheers. Kate's hands flew to her face in surprise. She hadn't known he'd learned to speak her language. The other diplomats, both human and Magnite, began making their respective gestures for love and celebration. The first human-Magnite marriage. Someone shouted joyfully. Bond, James corrected with a laugh. Consumption bond. I've learned to be very careful with translations. Kate walked to his platform, and with practiced gentleness, lifted him up to her eye level. You learned our language, she said softly. Well, I figured if I was going to be consumed, I should at least be able to talk about it properly. The celebration that followed put the Unity Festival to shame. Humans and Magnates danced together, having worked out ways to do so safely. The food tables had sections for both sizes, and James noticed with amusement that more Magnites were trying human vegetables. Later, in the embassy garden where they had first admitted their feelings, Kate held James carefully in her palm. Are you sure about this? She asked. Being married to someone 4 times your size won't be easy. I'm sure, James said. Besides, we've already figured out the hard parts. You don't accidentally step on me anymore. I've stopped flinching when you reach for me. And we found restaurants that cater to both sizes. And the sleeping arrangements. I've gotten used to being the little spoon. Very little spoon. He grinned up at her. Though I still think we should get separate blankets. Yours is like being wrapped in a circus tent. Kate laughed, the sound making flowers sway around them. To think you once thought I was going to eat you. Well, technically, you did consume me, just not the way I expected. James stood up in her palm, placing his hand against her cheek, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Above them, the twin suns of magnitude set in a perfect mix of Earth-like blue and Magnite silver. In the distance, construction had begun on their new home, designed to accommodate both their sizes comfortably. The first of its kind, but certainly not the last. "I love you," Kate said in careful English. "I am consumed by you," James replied in perfect Magnite. And neither of them felt afraid at all.